Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the second of 3 live sessions that we're doing today, all about ON1 Photo RAW. If you missed the earlier session, don't worry. We've recorded all these. They're going to be available to watch later. And we'll be taking questions at the end of each session. So go ahead, log into that chat window there and ask your questions, or you can just tweet to hashtag #AskON1, and that's the number 1. I'm Hudson Henry. I'm really proud to be hosting this here in my studio. I'm a Portland, Oregon photographer and photo educator. I love to go out to really wild places and capture ultra high resolution images. Places that are tough to get a lot of equipment into, and I have some fun panoramic merger techniques I like to use to get really high resolution images of places that don't normally get that treatment. I also have had the pleasure over this last year of coaching the ON1 Plus community. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the 3rd session today. And I'm joined by a bunch of amazing folks here. I'm going to just let Liz LePage introduce herself first.
Hi, I am Liz LePage, and I've actually been working with ON1 for a while now, about 6 or 7 years. You might recognize my voice. I've been doing educational tutorials for them for a bit. I'm also a professional photographer, retoucher, and educator on the side, and I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, and I definitely like to shoot a little bit more of the casual lifestyle photography, so it's nice we've got an interesting group of people here. Next we've got Dan.
Hi everybody, I'm Dan Narlikar. I'm the Director of Product Management here at ON1. I've been with the company for 10 years. In my free time when I get to shoot, I love to drag out my old 4x5 Crown Graphic and shoot some black and white landscapes.
And Blake?
Yes, I'm Blake Rudis, a photo educator with F64Academy.com. And I pride myself in my photo workflow. I really take a lot of time to develop a workflow process so that you can get your tones, your colors, and your artistic effects all right in one spot. So I'm really excited because we're doing our Photoshop session here. We're talking about integration with ON1 Photo RAW with Photoshop and also Lightroom as well.
Lightroom, yeah.
So
this session is going to be primarily focused on talking about how well ON1 really plays with others. Blake comes to the table as a primarily Photoshop user. I have always been, well, haven't always been, but originally I was a Photoshop user. Then I moved to Lightroom, and I've been using ON1 for a long time to finish edit my images. ON1 Photo RAW is going to let us continue with that workflow if you're really into Lightroom, if you're really into Photoshop. Whatever software you're using, it's going to blend in nicely with. And that's Blake and I were talking about this in the first session. That's just sort of, it's mandatory. If I'm going to use software, I want it to all work well together, because let's face it, there's ways that you develop over the years your own workflow process. Whether it's, everybody's going to have it slightly different, but there are things that work better for one thing, things that work better for another. Now, Photo RAW brings us a whole bunch of new features and opportunities to work with RAW files in a way that we've never been able to before.
Exactly.
And that was one of the things that we talked a lot about in the first session. We're going to continue hitting some of those features as we move through how we're using it in conjunction with Lightroom and Photoshop in this session. But if you really want to see all the amazing new features, that session we recorded this morning is really going to showcase it all for you. So, we've been talking a long time here about Lightroom and Photoshop. Blake and I each recorded a little video to kind of showcase how we like to use the software in conjunction with those platforms. So let's take it away and take a look at that. Oh, it's going to be about 11 and a half minutes. So just because ON1 Photo RAW has all this new RAW processing power and technology, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to abandon the other software that you're used to using. If you're a Lightroom user like me, who's used to processing your RAW files in Lightroom and then going into ON1 to do finish editing or composite editing, there's no reason you can't continue along in your new workflow, particularly as you're just sort of figuring out the software and deciding where you want to go and what features you want to take advantage of. You're really going to find with Photo RAW that you just have a bunch more features to take advantage of. I know my buddy Blake likes to use Photoshop. I can't imagine he's going to just dump Photoshop because Photo RAW has come along. He's actually going to follow me up here with a video of his own on how he likes to use Photo RAW with Photoshop. I'm going to show you some things that I've always loved to do with ON1 and its integration with Lightroom, and some things that are new and cool that you can do in your integration with ON1 and Lightroom. So one thing that I've been doing for the past several versions of ON1 is I've moved culling into ON1 Browse. And you might ask, well, why have you if you're organizing in Lightroom and raw processing in Lightroom, why would you do that? Well, one reason is that when I go out on a shoot, a lot of times I'll shoot 500, 1,000, 3,000 images in a day. And particularly when you're out in the field and you're working with a laptop, you don't have all the processing power in the world with you. You don't necessarily want to sit and make Lightroom build an entire catalog around those images that you're bringing in when you know you're going to be deleting a whole bunch of them as you cull. And I'm just going to light up this little series of images that I took about a year ago at this place in Argentina called Lago Torre. It's an Argentinian Patagonia. I've not built any previews for these images. I'm just able to quickly whip through them in ON1 Photo RAW because it processes them so quickly. It lets me just really rapidly jump in and quickly determine which images I want to keep, which images I want to cull. As I go through here, I can quickly run through here and rate. This one I really like of my wife Stacy. She was 7 months pregnant with our little boy Pike here. This one's, it's a keeper. I like that one. It's cute. Maybe I'll give it 1 star. I'm just pushing 1 on the keyboard. This one, she's going to hate. Her eyes are closed, her mouth's open. So I'm going to hit the X key to just mark that for deletion. And as I run through, I don't like that one of myself. I'm going to delete that. I keep pushing through here. These are some star images I'll probably want to take a look at processing. That one might be too dark. I might X that one out. And yeah, you get the idea. As I run through, I'm going to take a look through these images, and you can see I've gone through, I've marked X's on a bunch of them. I've put blue markings on ones that I recognize as panoramic merger files. You can see these are each a piece of a larger photo. I've marked green on images that are part of a time-lapse sequence. There are a whole bunch of 2-star images I've tagged in here. And I've gone through earlier and filtered this. If I click on the filters and I take a look at just the X images, I can go ahead and select those and go ahead and delete these files. Oops, I hit rename. I'm going to go ahead and delete these files. Boom, they're gone. They're in the trash can. And so, jumping back out of here, turn off the filter, those files are no more. So the great thing about this is you can run through really quickly without building a bunch of previews in Lightroom and waiting for that database to build, and really cull it down to just the images that matter to you before you ever import that folder into Lightroom. Then, once you jump into Lightroom with your folder, you can quickly cull and say, I really only want to see 2-star and above images from this particular trip. And have it just render and build previews for the images that you like best. It's a real time saver, it's a processing saver, and it's going to be a really nice front end to your workflow, even if you're continuing to work in Lightroom. It's just an easy way to cull through more quickly. And so now that I've got all my culled images imported into Lightroom and I've just got the files that I want to work with, I've filtered it down to the 2-star images that are really my favorites from this shoot. And I want to work on this particular image right here. I'm going to jump into the develop module. This is one I've been thinking about editing for a while. And I've gone through and I've done some raw processing here in Lightroom. You can see I've straightened the horizon a little bit. I've boosted the black point. I've just done some edits. I did a little sharpening because I always want to do my sharpening and noise reduction on the raw file before I go ahead and do finish edits in Photo RAW's effects module. And that's something to really consider the timing of. So if you're doing your raw processing in Lightroom, I'm going to suggest that you do at least your basic adjustments, your basic raw processing adjustments, and then jump into the detail panel here and also do some sharpening and noise reduction if necessary before you go ahead and export that file to work with in Photo RAW. Just because you want to do it at the raw level, not necessarily on the file after it comes back as a Photoshop document. So there's a tendency, I think a lot of people right-click their image and go to the Edit In menu to get into ON1 effects. That's kind of the way that I see a lot of students doing that. I'm going to suggest instead that you jump into the File, plug in Extras menu, and then go ahead and choose ON1 Effects 2017. And that's going to go ahead and have ON1 Photo render you a PSD file to edit in ON1 Effects. Now here's a choice that you're faced with. Do you want to use a normal photo or a smart photo? I'm going to suggest you go with a smart photo because you're going to be able to go back in later and re-edit all the changes, all the moves that you did in Effects. Working with a smart photo is going to make everything re-editable. Each of the filters in the stack, the mask that you apply, it's all re-editable later if you decide to go back in and have a look at it. Here I'm just going to go in really quick, add a couple of effects I know this image is going to use. I'm going to add a little bit of small detail, but I'm going to turn down this dynamic contrast a little bit. I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to add a fall color enhancer, but yeah, I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. I really love how it's punching the color in the foreground rocks, the way I really remember that color being. But I want to go ahead and I want to mask that effect out of the moraine. I don't want that kind of orange hue happening in the moraines alongside this glacial lake. So there's that. And I'm going to go ahead and I know I want to use a sky enhancing, color enhancing filter. And I definitely want to tone that down just a little bit, but I love that pop in the clouds and the blue sky that this filter gives me. Now I want to showcase another really cool thing that we have going for us in Photo RAW's version of effects. Mid-stack rendering. So I want to keep that beautiful blue sky effect, but I want to wonder, well, is that fall color enhancer too much of an effect? Well, I can turn that off now. In the past, we would have to go in, and if I wanted to turn off the color enhancer here, it would turn off the sky as well. There was no way to turn off the middle layer without turning off all the layers above it. Now we can really work on individual layers. I could run in here and retweak my mask on this layer and still see the layer above in effect as I work on it. And that's been a big thing that I've been wanting in effects for a really long time. Another thing that's really cool is these local adjustments. You can add a local adjustment brush like a graduated filter or a brush with a whole bunch of develop-like effects. And this is coming from Photo RAW's develop module. Now, because we jumped in here directly as effects and we're working on a RAW, we're not working on the RAW file itself, you've done those developing moves in Lightroom. You don't necessarily need to be bouncing back and forth between a develop and effects as if you were using this as a standalone. But the ability to go in and do just a little bit of work, let's say that you wanted to turn the contrast up in the sky. You could literally just jump in here and paint in that effect. You could turn the saturation way up, and we don't necessarily want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and X that out. But the ability to do that is a cool new feature within effects. I go ahead, I click done here, and this file is going to get baked in. It's going to apply all the effects, round trip me back into Lightroom. And one of the coolest things that I love that it does is it drops it into Lightroom stacked against the original file. For those of you that have been using Lightroom in conjunction with ON1 effects to do your finish editing for a while, you're not going to notice a big change, except that we've got these local effects that we can apply, which are coming to us from that cool new develop module that's part of ON1 Photo RAW that'll work on RAW files. And it's also bringing us mid-stack rendering. So here, I've got my my finish edited image, and it's a subtle change here, but that's really what makes it's much more dramatic. It's what makes that image pop, and that's the reason why I love working in ON1 effects to finish edit my images. It's quick, it's easy, and it gets me the look that I want. So to sum things up, my suggestion is you use ON1 Photo RAW's browse app to go ahead and do really fast job of culling and marking the images that you're most excited about, color coding those images, and getting them ready to import into Lightroom without wasting a whole bunch of time building previews and catalogs on images that you're just going to delete anyway. When you're going to jump into one of ON1's apps, go ahead and use that plugin extras menu. It just gives you a little more power to bounce back and forth between the different apps once you're inside. And it gives you access to ON1 layers in Photo RAW, which is a really powerful tool for compositing and masking and doing a whole bunch of different things. And you can jump to any of the other apps right there from layers. That's a really cool landing pad. And then finally, take advantage of that mid-stack rendering. You can edit in the middle of your filter stack while you're working in effects, which is a really, really cool new feature. And recognize that you've got those local adjustments and graduated filters and brushes to work with right there while you're there. Otherwise, your experience moving between Lightroom and Photo RAW should be really seamless, comfortable, and very much like what you're used to, with a whole bunch of cool new features and a lot more power. All right, and we're back. I think from that video, those of you who are longtime Lightroom ON1 users can see that not a whole lot has actually changed in the way that you interact with those two programs together. There's just a bunch of new features and speed. The sliders are moving so much faster. You can literally see the effect happening real time as you're working in effects on different filters. And we've got an amazing ability to do these local adjustments and the mid-stack rendering. So those of you that are used to using ON1 effects to finish edit your images like Blake and I, you can go in there and turn off a filter in the middle of the stack, and it doesn't turn off the entire set of filters that are layered above it. You can turn it off and still see the effect of those layers that are on top. And I think that's a really important distinction, and something that those of us who've been using effects for a long time are really, really excited about. So we've got a lot of performance enhancements, we've got new ways of interacting with the filter stack in effects, and we've got these local adjustments that cross across. Wherever you want to access them, they're right there. And so it's a really exciting day with Photo RAW, and it's impressive to me that this is a completely new piece of software. I mean, if you watch the earlier session, Dan talks about how they basically sort of nuked Photo 10, started from ground zero, and built this whole thing with a new, faster processing engine that works both with RAW files, PSDs like we're used to, JPEGs. It even works with JPEGs and gives you more latitude to work with them than what you're used to in the past. So, I think that those of us that are using Lightroom should be really excited. There's a lot to offer here. It's not just for people that are excited about using raw images in the raw developed process.
There really is a lot that's different, even for a Lightroom user and for a Photoshop user. We spend a lot of time talking about the non-destructive workflow and the raw engine. You can still take advantage of a lot of those pieces, even when it's used as a plugin. And plugins are super important to us. We kind of talked about it during the intro, but being able to fit into your workflow wherever you want to fit, whether it's at the beginning, middle, end, or all of it, will accommodate that, and you can use which portions of it you want. So you can still use it as a plugin to Lightroom and Photoshop just the way you're used to, but you get all those benefits you talked about. You get all that great new speed improvement. You get the ability to bounce seamlessly between development effects. You get all those local adjustments. It's a much better product for you today.
And I think if you want that ability to bounce between effects and develop, you should definitely go up through that plugin extras menu and open it that way, because it's going to give you more access to bouncing back and forth between the apps.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good question. A lot of people ask what's the difference between using it through the plugin extras menu versus using it from the edit in menu.
Right.
The big difference is when you go through that plugin extras menu, we get extra ways to talk to Lightroom. We can do a better job of managing copies, making sure that your preferences are honored in terms of the type of file that we're going to edit on. And we can make sure that when those changes come back, we can tell Lightroom, hey, the file's changed, make sure you show it correctly. When it goes through that other method, which actually goes to an external editor,
right,
it's kind of fire and forget. We don't get to talk to Lightroom anymore after that point. So if it makes extra copies or things like that, you have to go back and clean those up on your own. So it's better to go through that plugin extras menu. That's where you get access to layers and things like that through plugin extras instead.
A lot of the students that I work with are so used to just right-clicking, choosing edit in, and going to, say, effects, or going to develop, or going to... You can't get to layers from there. And like Dan just said, you don't have quite as much control over how it's handling your file and the ability to bounce back and forth between the different apps. So it's really important to know up there file plugin extras. So I think that the other really critical thing for you Lightroom users that aren't using Browse right now, I think back, I don't remember whether it was Photo 9 or Photo 10 that you came out with fast preview. Mm-hmm. But they did something really cool when they came out with fast preview, and it's even more improved now. Back then, they were looking at your raw files embedded JPEG, the one that the camera uses to display that image on the back screen right after you shoot it, because the camera's not showing you a raw file, it's showing you a little JPEG that it creates of that file. So ON1 went ahead, made it so that you could choose fast preview, and it would just load those, and you go through and cull really fast without rendering JPEGs from the raw files. Well, now with Photo RAW, you guys have developed the GPU processing to the point where it loads a nice big JPEG from the RAW file basically instantaneously. And you can run through and cull your images so fast in Browse that those of us that really enjoy using Lightroom and build catalogs of our images, I mean, Liz and I do these shoots for clients where you may come back with 5,000 images.
Thousands and thousands of photos.
And if you sit down and tell Lightroom you want to import 5,000 images and wait to build previews and build your database file for those 5,000 images, you might as well go have dinner, go to bed, come back the next morning to go through and start culling. And you're using a lot of processing power and time that doesn't necessarily need to be spent. So if you jump in to browse at the front end of your workflow, run through and just mark those images for deletion that you're never going to work on. You know, the one where your portrait subject's like, you know that one's a delete. You just get rid of it, right?
What was that?
Yeah, you've seen them. The eyes tight closed, the face scrunched. You know, there's those images that you just know are deletes. You don't want to spend the time building preview files for those, then having to go back through and choose. You know, I tend to go through, mark my images that I know I'm never going to work with, mark my images that I know I really want to work with, you know, with 2 stars, maybe even 3 if they're fantastic, and then mark some things that might be useful as 1 star. And then when I bring it into Lightroom, all those stars are going to come through too. All I have to do when I'm going through browse is touch the 1 key, touch the 2 key, touch the 3 key. Ooh, I don't want that. That's an X. Then when I use the filter, I can delete all those X'd out images in browse and then bring that file into Lightroom and have it build the catalog, but have it render minimal previews. Just tiny, don't spend any time at it. Then sort it to 2 stars and above, and render big previews for those to go through and really determine what your best images are.
What I thought was pretty cool about that, because when I was looking at your video, you went from browse into Lightroom, and because we were talking about the XMP sidecar files in the first session, a lot of your stars and your ratings and the system that you made for cataloging in browse transferred right over into Lightroom, and they played really well together.
Colors too.
In the colors too. And then on top of that though, you know, I'm kind of an anomaly here because number one, I use a Windows computer, so all these guys are throwing rocks at me when we're not on set. And then I also don't use Lightroom, you know, so I'm really an anomaly. I'm like the lowest of the low here. So, but what I really like about browse is the other day I went out and I did a shoot. And I pulled the whole thing into my computer into, you know, Windows File Explorer, which is just the place where you go and look at your images. And you notice that when you bring 300 to 400 files in there, you have to wait for your preview to even come up in the File Explorer right there in Windows.
Right.
So what I did was I went right into Browse to see if it would make the previews for me faster than my File Explorer did. And I had them side by side, one monitor. And here I am in Browse just flipping right through them, and Windows is still trying to keep up with creating those JPEG previews that come up in the little preview file. So, you know, we're talking about even my little archaic system that I have there.
Well, I don't think Mac Finder's any faster.
Right.
No. No.
But, you know, you're taking a step, you're basically allowing the creative process to happen a lot faster. Because the last thing we want is to be really jazzed up. I mean, I'll come back from a shoot and I'll even like, you know, maybe kiss my wife on the forehead and say, okay, gotta go. There's this one shot I really gotta look at before I even say hi to you. You know, and then I run downstairs and I want to take a look at that one shot. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm sitting there waiting for Windows to create my preview when now I just hop into Browse and there they are. They're right there. And it's really that fast. And, you know, there is a lot of excitement about that. You can tell I get kind of passionate about some of these things. But I love my wife, but, you know, sometimes those photographs are just, gotta get to those first.
Well, let's hope Blake's wife's not watching this live session.
Yeah, I think using browse at the beginning and then using for is great. I call it the Lightroom sandwich, if you will. So you use it for your fast importing at the beginning.
Yeah.
Do all of your cataloging, your basic raw edits. Lightroom's an excellent tool for that.
It is.
And if that's the tool you're used to using already, go ahead, continue to do that. Then when you want to add those special effects, then you can send it out to ON1 Photo RAW. It's a great workflow.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, one thing that Dan talked about earlier when we were talking about new features was the fact that these sidecar files are going to live side by side in your folder with your raw files, and you can go ahead and work on them in Lightroom and then go ahead and work on them in Photo RAW. Mm-hmm. It's not going to hurt. There's not going to be any problem with working with the two. They aren't going to see each other's edits, but all you have to do is go ahead and export a PSD file, and both of them will see those edits.
Yep, and
so,
they will see metadata changes that are shared between them, because all of your keywords and descriptions and ratings and labels, all that stuff gets written to that XMP sidecar file, and either one will see those changes. So that will go back and forth, but the great thing is it's non-destructive. The original RAW file is safe. You could use it in as many RAW editors as you want, and that RAW photo is still safe and untouched.
Well, and I would encourage people that are Lightroom users to go ahead and use some raw files and see what's possible in the raw editor, in that develop module, or in the develop app in ON1 Photo RAW, because it's pretty incredible. Right.
And I shouldn't say just RAW. It's really any file will go through that non-destructive pipeline, whether it's a JPEG or a TIFF or a PSD or a PNG. It's the same, works the same non-destructive interface.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like it. It makes it very versatile. You really don't. Everyone has a different idea of how they like to work on their images. I mean, every single one of us standing at this table does something different with our photos. And there are a lot of people, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when I'm working for clients that need photos really quickly, I shoot RAW and JPEG, and a lot of times JPEG is what I process as fast as possible so that I can get them a sample. I mean, clients don't want to wait a long time to get their images. They want something right away. And so I have the versatility of figuring out how I can make that happen. And the problem that I've had in the past is speed.
Yeah.
And so this is changing the workflow so that I could get images quicker. And it's like the day of the shoot. It's me and Blake sitting at our computers like, oh my God, you guys, I got to go edit this photo. I'll talk to you later. I know you guys are all going out and having a great night. I'm going to sit at home with my computer. But it's important because when you have people who are really chomping at the bit to see their images, this is a way to make it happen faster. And you can do it in so many different ways. Lightroom, ON1, combine them together in any way that you want.
Absolutely, and being able to apply a preset directly out of Browse. I mean, this is sort of getting away from Lightroom for a moment, but the fact that while you're there in Browse doing your culling and sorting, you can throw up a preset that you've created that you like the look of. You know, I have a set of presets that I go to all the time. I can just click and apply it to a whole set, send those images out to a client to see which of those 2-star images they like best. You know, say this is not finished edited, but it's close. You know, I've got clients I work with on a frequent basis that get used to that kind of thing. This is a big time saver. And I think that just using that culling process in Browse with the speed that Browse affords you is a big time saver. And that's really what drew me into the ON1 universe to begin with as a Lightroom photographer, was the fact that in effects, I could get that final look I wanted with my images and create presets that across the board on a whole different variety of images would get that for me with a little bit of quick tweaking, and it would get me out in the field spending more time creating new photographs instead of trying to fix old photographs. You know, if I can get something that it takes me 2 minutes to edit an image instead of 5 minutes, that's huge. That gets me out in the field twice as much, making more images, and that's what it's all about.
Well, and if you multiply, I mean, you know, the last wedding I shot, it was 4,000 images, I think, and I edit or at least batch process a large part of those, so I'm dealing with 1,000 photos. And like, imagine, do the math in your heads, or don't, but imagine the math in your head. Imagine doing 5 to 10 minutes per image.
Oh, yeah.
And then imagine doing 2 minutes per image. The amount of time that you're saving is astronomical. I think it's I mean, I can get out and actually do things I want to do other than photography sometimes. I mean, that's kind of exciting.
Wait, yeah, but
what is there?
like
right? It's shocking. Everybody take a breath. I do not just do photography. But it's great because that time difference alone, people don't always notice it right at first. And then all of a sudden you're realizing that instead of staying up until midnight, you actually can finish by 8 o'clock. And you're like, oh, I could go out for a nice dinner, you know?
Well, one of the things that I enjoyed about too is, so I don't use Lightroom, but I do use Adobe Camera Raw, which is essentially the same development module as Lightroom. So when I first got my hands on Photo RAW, I'll tell you a little story here, Dan. Put the same photos next to each other, one in Adobe Camera Raw, one in Bridge, and I was like, all right, epic showdown. You know, so I do that with everything. So I said, okay, what algorithms are being used here so I can see, because sometimes you play with some raw processors and you move those highlights and shadows and you're like, oof,
Yeah.
that is not good. So my first honest test for Photo RAW was to compare it to Adobe Camera Raw and see if it could produce a good RAW file with those sliders. Because to me, that's important. It's not just about speed at this point. It's also about what the product is delivered at the end. And I was very happy when I was moving those sliders around, and I was like, wow, I'm getting, you know, as good, if not better in some cases, RAW processing on my images because of the various sliders that you offer there, and then also the ability to supplement those with the effects panel immediately. And
Right.
we saw that in your video. When you clicked there was no video magic. You know, you went right over there, and it was
It's
video.
automatic.
Also, it's automatic. It goes right over to effects,
Right.
and it starts to build on that stack. So I mean, that's a real big kudos to, because now to ON1, because it's not very easy, I would say, to get that algorithm down to get a good raw file out of those edits that you make. And that's important, because when it really comes down to it, you could have the fastest product out there, but if it doesn't deliver similar results,
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to be pleased with it. And that's why I'm probably pleased with the most is the results.
That
I
is
achieve.
our number one thing that we focused on. So yes, speed is important. All these other features are important, but at the end of the day, it's the image quality that is
Right.
the most important thing to us. If we cannot provide excellent image quality from any photo that you work on, then we failed. So
Absolutely.
that's our number one goal.
I think you guys knocked it out of the park on that front,
And
along with speed.
We'll
and
continue to
flexibility.
improve it too, so it'll always get better.
So while we're talking about how well ON1 plays with others like Lightroom, Blake's kept saying he doesn't even use Lightroom. So I think he's going to talk a little bit about his relationship with Photoshop.
Right. So what you're going to see in this, it's about an 8-minute video coming up here. I'm going to show you how I use some of my automated processes in Photoshop combined with Photo RAW to show you how I maximize my efficiency. And what you're going to see in this video is it's an entire from start to finish image from beginning to end, and it's only about 8 minutes long. So it's actually pretty good results. One of the beautiful things about ON1 Photo RAW is the ability to either start in Photo RAW and go into Photoshop. So I can start my workflow in Photo RAW, hop into Photoshop, do what I need to do in Photoshop, and be done with it. Or I can start here in Photoshop like I am right now, go into ON1 Photo RAW, do maybe some dynamic contrast or something, hop back into Photoshop, do some of my things, and then even go back into Photo RAW to do some more tweaking of the image. So it's a workflow process essentially. And it can fit anywhere in that workflow process. So for me, I do a lot of things with tone and color and artistic effects, and I see a really good place for ON1 Photo RAW either at the very beginning of my workflow or usually at the very end of my workflow. So I'm going to show you just a brief instance of what I'm talking about here. So before I begin, I'm just going to press Command or Control J to duplicate my background layer. And I'm going to go up to Filter, I'm going to go to ON1, and I'm going to go to ON1 Effects 2017. So now this image that we're looking at right now, I didn't do anything to. I didn't bring it into Camera Raw, I just brought it right into Photoshop, because one of the things that I really like about this is the ability to maybe somewhat tone map my image in ON1 Effects. So I can kind of get an HDR look on my photograph, but unlike other HDR software where you can't really mask too well, I can actually use things like the HDR look and the dynamic contrast to boost some of the details in just the rocks of my image that you see here, but also use the masking feature to push certain things away. So let's go to Add Filter and let's go to HDR Look. So I'm going to do one of my key things that I do with ON1 Photo RAW, and I'm going to just bump up my compression quite a bit and even my detail quite a bit. And this is a really bad HDR image. But one of the things I think is great about ON1 Photo RAW, and I've said this many times even about Effects 10, is when you go into the blending options and you say Apply To. Now I don't want this to apply to my shadows or my highlights, because if it applies to highlights I'm going to get halos, and if it applies to my shadows I'm going to get all kinds of noise in those shadow areas. So I'm going to say Apply To and go to Midtones. And now I can adjust the range of those midtones and basically get my own custom HDR look to very specific spots in my photograph. So I like that look right about there because I like how I can start to see some of the stuff through the water, and I also like how I can really see a lot of the detail in the rocks. I'm also going to protect those highlights a little bit and protect those shadow areas a little bit in those midtone areas to protect them from that effect. Then I'll hop in, put a mask on, maybe brush away some of this background area because I don't want that to be as high contrast as the stuff in the foreground. Brush all that away. And then I can do the same thing. I can hop right in here, make a new filter, and go to Dynamic Contrast. So Dynamic Contrast, again, is going to give me some of that really gritty looking detail in those rocks and in my grass, and also in these rocks by the water here. So I'm going to decrease that large amount a little bit, maybe decrease that small amount, just increase that medium amount. But again, go into those blending options, say Apply To, and only apply those to my midtones, and look at the range of those midtones that I want that applied to. So I want it about right there, and then maybe I'll protect some of the highlights within those mids and the shadows within those mids. And then again, make a mask and paint out any of the top area. And just keep painting out that top area up there until I don't have any of that stuff being applied to that top area. So it's kind of like selective tone mapping. I'm saying, okay, go ahead and give me some of that nice gritty detail in my foreground area, but protect anything in the background because I really don't want you to affect those areas. And now if we look at the before and after of this, if we just hit the preview button here, here's the before, here's the after. Much more heightened contrast in the foreground area that starts my whole process in Photoshop. So when I go ahead and press done, this is going to open me up in Photoshop and I'll be ready to edit in Photoshop. So here we are back in Photoshop. I'm going to rename this layer 1 to ON1 and just call it Dynamic Contrast. Okay, and now I'm ready to edit
further. So with waterfall images, and the reason why I would do this, you'd say, well, why don't you just do all the processing in ON1 Photo RAW? Well, you see what happened back here in the waterfall? This waterfall turned into a stark highlight. There's not much I can do about that. However, I do have an action that I've created where all I have to do is press play on this and I start to get some of the detail back in my waterfall areas. So I'm going to just press Command or Control T, and then I'll zoom out here and get this to the exact angle of my waterfall. And now I've got some detail back in that waterfall there. So now I'm using ON1 in conjunction with my workflow with Photoshop so that I can get the best of both worlds. I can get that nice dynamic look, also fix up that waterfall area back there, maybe just drop the opacity here to about 13%, and then I could continue on even further with my regular workflow. One of the things I like to do is this kind of radiance look that I also have an action for. So now I'm mixing my automated workflow within Photoshop with that workflow from ON1 Photo RAW to really maximize my results in Photoshop. So I'll go ahead and just drag and drop this folder on top of here. And now you're starting to see me build up this layered effect of images here. So if we look at our before, this is what we started with. Then we added that dynamic contrast, brought that waterfall back, and then also added some of this radiating look to our image. I might even take this a little bit further and just add a little bit of a color grade to my image. Again, another action or a predefined thing that I have already laid out with my workflow. And now I'm really speeding up my process to make an incredible photograph. At the end of my workflow, I can go ahead and make a stamp of all these layers by pressing Control, Shift, Alt, and E. Kind of makes your fingers look like a pterodactyl claw or something like that. And that makes a stamp of everything that happened below. So from here, I can go to Filter, go back into ON1 Effects, and use some of my favorite finishing touch features that are in ON1 Effects. So I'll go to Add Filter, and I'll go over to the Sunshine filter. And in the Sunshine filter, I'll just bump that amount up a little bit, maybe increase that warmth a slight bit. Look at the saturation. It's getting a little out of hand there, so I'll leave the saturation a little lower. Maybe drop that amount a little bit too. So if we look at the before and then we look at the after, Sunshine's looking pretty good. I can go ahead and add filter and maybe add a nice vignette here that we have in ON1 Effects 10, the nice big softy one. But again, when I apply that vignette, I want to make sure that I go to these apply to settings in my protection settings and protect any of those big strong highlight areas from any of the big vignette that's going on there. That way we don't have any tone compression in those highlight areas. And then I'll go ahead and press done. And that'll pop us back into Photoshop and we can look at what we did. So we started out with this kind of boring, bland looking photograph, added that nice dynamic contrast to it, brought some of the waterfall area back, increased some of our temperature and gave it a nice little glow in Photoshop, added a little gradient map for some color grading, and then added some of that ON1 again. So you can see here, I used ON1 effects at the beginning of my workflow and at the end of my workflow. Number one, to kind of help me tone map that image and get me that HDR look that I absolutely love in my photographs. However, able to protect some of my background areas so they didn't get quite as dynamic of a contrast as my rocks and some of the detailed texture areas. And then I also used ON1 effects at the end of that Photoshop workflow to give me some of those finishing touches. And it was a very quick process that yielded awesome results from our beginning to our end.
So as you can see in that video, I use Photoshop in conjunction with Photo RAW in many different ways. I use it at the beginning of my workflow and I use it at the end. Now I have this kind of staple workflow where I go through tone, color, and artistic effects. And I have this mentality that it doesn't really matter what you use and how you use it as long as you fill those boxes. And the beauty of ON1 Photo RAW is that it's got the capability to either do your tone, your color, or your artistic effects, and either do it in a one-stop shop or supplement some of your workflow with Photoshop. And one of the things to think about there is that it's another tool set. I'm going to say it's more like a toolbox, but you know, like the invention of this table, for instance. You can't build this table with just a drill. A drill is important, but you can't build it with a drill. You can't just build this table with a planer either. You need multiple tools in order to build this. So a lot of times people get into this narrow-minded thought process of, okay, we've got this new software, what do we throw away? Mm-hmm. And that's not the concept. The concept isn't, okay, we get rid of this because this came out. It's where do I see this fitting in with what I'm currently doing to make my process more efficient? And efficiency is the key here. We've talked about speeding up the workflow, getting the creative process moving a little bit faster. And when you have this whole new toolbox now. It's a one-stop shop. There's a lot of tools in one specific place too. And as we've talked before in our side conversations and stuff, a lot of the stuff that you can do in ON1 Photo RAW, you can actually do in Photoshop.
Oh, sure.
But it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And not just time, but it takes a lot of know-how. I mean, I've been in Photoshop for 17 or 18 years now, and I'm sure your experience is much more than mine when it comes to Photoshop. So you know that, yeah, over time, you can get to know this stuff pretty well, but finding it sometimes, because they've gone from a photo processor to text to video to this to that. There's so many different pockets of places that things are put in that it's very difficult sometimes to find what it is that you need to use on a photo.
Yeah, Photoshop is really deep. I mean, I started back on version 2.5. I mean, layers was revolutionary when it came out.
Right.
And back then it was pretty lightweight. It was made just for photographers. It used the terms that we understood, but it's grown over the last 20 years to support all those different people. So it has to support scientists and doctors and videographers and illustrators and 3D modeling and all that stuff. And getting to just the part that photographers care about can be kind of tough. And I remember back in the day when we started as a plugin company, a lot of people said, "What do I need those plugins for? I got Photoshop. I could do that." And yeah, you can. I mean, you could copy that layer and change it to screen and add a luminosity mask and then use the blend if sliders, or I could just use the sunshine filter and get the exact same thing a lot faster without having to know all the little secret ins and outs that you have to for Photoshop.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because the things like, I love blend if in Photoshop. I think it's one of the most powerful tools next to the curves adjustment and masking. You give me those three things and I'm good to go. But all of that stuff is built into every filter that's in effects. And that's the beauty and the intricacies I talked about, the analogy in the past of how you have this deep ocean of software. And in the very bottom, you got these really cool glowing monsters. So to say. And they're not monsters, they're just interesting.
They're friendly glowing
they're
monsters.
friendly glowing monsters. Yeah, so when you dig deep in there and you find that you can, especially when it comes to local adjustments, I mean, come on. We're talking about the complexities here of being able to make a mask, make that mask only affect my midtones, and only have the highlights and adjusting the range of that all within one filtered effect. That's extremely powerful. And that's actually about 7 or 8 steps in a Photoshop process that's now in one specific location. Creating something like the sunshine filter, like you said, would probably create 3 or 4 different adjustment layers in Photoshop, but it's all in one nice intuitive place, especially for beginners and someone who's just starting out. This is incredible. It's incredible.
I think people get very nervous when they hear the word shortcut. And I think that people get very cautious around that idea. And what I love about ON1 is they give us the shortcuts to save time on Photoshop filters. And I know exactly what you mean. I can kind of do the same thing in Photoshop, but it's going to take me 3 times as long. I'm going to have 3 different layers and they're all going to have separate masks, and I'm going to have to make those masks manually, and that's going to drive me crazy. And ON1 offers a shortcut, but it's the kind of shortcut where you look at it and you're like, holy cow, this is really good.
Right. Yeah.
And you can replicate things like bleach bypass is my favorite contrast in effects. I use it constantly because I do a lot of film recreation looks. And I can't get the same kind of bleach bypass in the same amount of time applied on the certain tones in my image, because I like to apply it on my highlights a lot of the times. And I can do that in Photoshop, but man, is it going to take me forever.
Sure. Well, and I get very territorial when something new comes out. It's kind of like that guerrilla concept of what's gonna be encroaching on my space now that this new thing has come out, because I kind of get a little scared and intimidated that maybe some of the things that I've been loving to do so much are now going to be made easier, and how does that make me feel? Because I'm a control freak. I love having ultimate control over my images from the very beginning to the very end. And a lot of times people will say that what I do is labor intensive. It's not labor intensive, it's layer intensive, I will tell you that, but it's not labor intensive, okay? But being able to supplement certain things at either the beginning, end, middle, or end of my workflow with using either smart objects or creating a stamp layer of all the other things, and then hopping over somewhere to take a little break from Photoshop and say, okay, I'm just going to I love sunshine, and now we have it on a cloudy day. Yeah. That was a joke. You can laugh at home if you're watching this.
Dad jokes extraordinaire.
I love dad jokes. But being able to supplement that, and especially, like I've talked about before, opening up my workflow with a tone map type effect without actually going into some tone mapping software. Because tone mapping software is great. I used to use it all the time. My blog used to be called Everyday HDR because I loved HDR photography. But what I didn't like was the fact that it applied it to my whole image. Well, now I can hop in from Photoshop, do some dynamic contrast, only allow it to hit my midtones, so I'm protecting those highlights from halos and my shadows from noise. That's power, you know, and then being able to go right into my workflow, my automated workflow that I have with some of the systems that I've developed, and then to take little pit stops and breaks in there.
It's one of the things that I've loved about using effects. One of my favorite features of it has been those protection modes, whether you're protecting highlights in the sky from too much dynamic contrast or skin tones.
Skin tones. Oh my gosh, that's a game changer.
Huge game changer. The ability to do the same thing with localized adjustments is also huge. You know, I've been a big fan of applying graduated filters in the develop module of Lightroom for a long time. That's one of the things that I really appreciated about that. I don't know, it was version 2 of Lightroom that came out that added that graduated tool. And I was a person who used to shoot a lot of film and carried a whole, 5 sets of graduated neutral density filters with me in the field, and I'm stopping down and figuring out, well, where is that line up on the horizon, and do I want to make my mountains black or do I want to leave a little sky white? You know, the ability to do that digitally was amazing. Well, now the ability to target where that tool is applying it in our finish editing and effects is just, or in develop, is fantastic. And I like the fact that those are available wherever I am in the editing process and the workflow on one.
Like you mentioned, smart objects, which I think is actually a really important thing to talk about. A lot of people, when they work through Photoshop, ignore this really powerful feature, and it works really well hand in hand with Photo RAW. It gives you the ability to go back and re-edit your settings, not just your settings, your masks, your brushstrokes, everything you've done. You get all that non-destructive workflow benefit, but through a layered Photoshop workflow. So to do it, you just convert your layer you want to work on to a smart object, send it to Photo RAW, and all of your adjustments are then stored as instructions in that Photoshop file. It's the same way as you can create a smart photo through the layers module. It works the same way, and it restores all your brushstrokes, all your masks, all your settings, so you can go back and change them, because I don't know about you, I don't get everything right the first try.
Right.
So let you go back and change it without having to throw it away and start all over again.
Well, what I also like about it too is that when you go into effects, it feels like the Photoshop layers palette now. I can move my effects. So let's say I make a black and white layer down here, change the opacity to, and then drop maybe the blending option to luminosity, bring out some of that contrast. And then up here I put a color adjustment, and then I say, you know what, it would be really nice if I could just put that up there. Well, now you can. In the past, in Photo 10, you were stuck with the effects where they were, and you couldn't really move them independently above the other ones. Well, now the effects move like layers. They turn on and off like layers, and Photoshop does. So going from Photoshop into effects seems like a seamless transition now. Instead of it looking like a foreign program, it looks very much like the layers palette in Photoshop. So it's a seamless kind of workflow. Even some of the hotkeys are the same too, which
That's
is
one
awesome.
of my favorite things.
Yeah, no, we try really hard to make sure that people who use multiple tools, that a lot of the behaviors and the keyboard shortcuts and things like that match. That way I don't, what's the keyboard shortcut to show the mask? Oh, it's O, because I'm used to pressing O. So we try to keep it all the same, changing brush size and brush feather and toggling tools. All of that, we try to use the same nomenclature that you're used to using in other apps.
It makes it a lot easier to transition from one product to another, because I know that there are a lot of people who may not be lifelong ON1 users, and we were actually talking the other day about the fact that most of us have been using ON1. Outside of Dan has been actually working there for a while. The rest of us have been using ON1 for a really, really long time, and I know that there are a lot of users out there who are new to ON1 Photo RAW, or at least new to Photo 10, and those shortcuts make it easier to transition from one software to the other. So when you're playing around with, if you're a diehard Photoshop user and you want to play around with Photo RAW, you're not going to get really frustrated because the brush keys are different. That would be something that would drive me absolutely insane, because brushing and masking is like, it's my jam.
Critical.
So I can't go into another program and not have access to those. And so I think what's really great about all this is it's intuitive and it's easy to grasp.
Yeah.
So you're not lost in this software.
Right.
And everything is being made more and more intuitive every single time that the software comes out, because you guys are really thinking about that.
And having the perfect brush as a masking tool. To be able to use, because in Photoshop you can make selections of things, but then you have to make a mask and, refine edge or whatever they have it now as custom selection or something like that, quick select. Being able to actually use a brush and brush in what you need to mask with the perfect brush for skies and stuff it's very intuitive and it works very well, you know, and that's one of the things that I pushed to the extreme too. I was like, okay, well, let's see what you got, you know, let's see if you can handle this, all right? So when I went in there, I'm looking at that purple brush, I'm like, man, this is going to change quite a bit with my workflow. The ability to copy those masks just like you can in Photoshop, invert those masks, make adjustments. And we even talked about things being like luminosity mask is a big thing now. And you can make a luminosity mask in Photo RAW to get the luminance value for that mask. But then you can also mask on top of that mask and even use your protection measures like we've been talking about. And those are kind of luminosity masks, but without being called that. So the thing about blend if is that blend if is kind of confusing. It's blend if, top layer, bottom layer, what the heck are you talking about, right? But in Photo RAW, it's a lot more simple. It's, well, do you want your highlights protected? Okay, move that over. And when you move it over, it's actually building that based off of the luminance values that are there, which is awesome when you're creating presets. Because then when you start making presets from those things, it's not stuck with a mask of the luminance value from the last one. It's using the luminance values from the image that you're giving it.
It's independent.
So as you're creating these presets for your portrait work, the lighting is going to change and the preset is going to match it based off of the luminance values that are in it based on the preset that you've created. And that's a really important thing to understand because masking, while masking is great, it's kind of permanent to that image. But when you use those protection measures, they're based off of the luminance values that's in that image. So if you say apply to midtones, well, the midtones in this image are going to change from this image to this image, but that preset is going to work the same. And these are heavy topics. We talked about this before.
Yeah.
Those are more of your advanced and in-depth things. But people who are used to that, having access to those types of advanced techniques in Photoshop are going to be really happy to see that those things happen very quickly and very easily with those blending options and those protection measures. Which I remember for a fact that in April, I sent either you or Patrick or Nathan an email and said, look, if you do anything, leave those protection measures in there. They are my absolute favorite thing, and if you take them out, I probably won't use this software.
I'm out.
And literally, like, I'm out if you don't have this in there. But not only did you put it in there, you also put it in the local adjustments, which I think was an incredible move.
Well, and I think, you know, the cool bottom line of all that is, like you said, when we're building presets, then right off the bat, you've got these presets that are making adjustments in effects, maybe in Develop if you're using it as a standalone. You bring your images in at the initial process, like we talked about, apply that preset across a broad range of images, and it's going to look spectacular on every single image just because it's using an independently based luminosity mask, completely dependent on what that image's tones are. It's really, really cool. So
Yeah. Well, it changes the way that we work with presets completely.
Yeah.
You know, if I apply a preset to a large amount of photos that were taken of the same people on the same day, it can be a lot easier to make that preset. But if I want to take that preset and apply it to another photo shoot, the lighting's going to be different. The people are going to look a little bit different. Fill in the blank, everything is going to be a little bit different. And so being able to protect skin tones is kind of my big thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I can take this really awesome film style preset. I have one that I use all the time, and long ago I would have to rearrange it for every single photo shoot. And now it's like I use that protect skin tones and I can just mass apply it across the board to multiple different shoots. And so it's and for the people who are new to all of this, I know Blake mentioned, like, this can be kind of a heavier subject. So there are a lot of people out there who are like, oh my gosh, you guys are talking about all this crazy stuff. And we were all beginners once. So, you know, we all, Blake and I were talking yesterday about the fact that, you know, instead of going out at night, we would sit and like pore over Photoshop books. And, you know, I think that that's a really great thing, right? I still love doing that. It's like, oh, you guys go have a good time. But the best part about this is if you click on that gear icon and you want to learn about how to use all these blending options, it literally says exactly what they do right in front of you. And that's something that can be frustrating about Photoshop. So I know some of you guys out there are kind of like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to get into this? And it's going to be really easy for you guys to play around with this if you haven't yet. So that's really awesome.
On the surface, it's very simple. I mean, let's face it, on the surface, when you look at it, it's a simple product that you can see and you recognize what these things do. But the beauty of it is the depth.
Yeah.
And for me, if I look at a program and it's two-dimensional, I'm done, you know? But if you give me 3 dimensions now of abilities, and, you know, when you go from the combinations of numbers, from 1 number, you have 1 combination, 2 numbers, you now have 2 combinations, 3 numbers, okay, it gets exponentially larger. So what you've created is not just a 2-dimensional or linear structure here. This is an exponential structure for a software program, if you think about it as a three-dimensional cube.
But on the surface, it's really approachable. And
Exactly,
that's one of the
yeah.
things. I have students come to me all the time say, I've got this brand new digital camera. I'm really excited about it. What software should I be using? My operating system software doesn't seem to be giving me what I want for editing my images. And my answer is always, if you don't have a background in Photoshop and understand, because Photoshop's grown into a behemoth, as we talked about. And no offense, for somebody
Right.
just approaching it for the first time, I'm always advocating that you start off in ON1 just because it's so intuitive.
And
But
that's a
it
great
plays
question.
nicely.
That's
It
a great
plays
question.
very nicely with everything.
Yeah, and if you want to branch out and start using other pieces of software, it's going to be really easy for you to do that. So.
I know that a lot of you guys out there also have questions. You've been sending us questions through our chat dialogue and also tweeting us with hashtag ON1. And we want to walk through a couple of those questions so that you guys can learn a little bit more about what's important to you. So, Dan, I know you've got a couple for us.
Yeah, well, let's hit a couple of the big ones we've seen so far. And there's a lot of questions about compatibility. What does it work with? So first off, for Photoshop, it'll work with Photoshop CS6 and newer. So that goes back quite a few years. It'll support all those versions of Photoshop. It'll go back to Photoshop Elements 14 if you're an Elements user. If you're a Lightroom user, it'll support Lightroom 5 and newer. Earlier, I may have mentioned Aperture. That was my Freudian slip of the day. It does not support Aperture any longer. If you're an Aperture user, there are great ways to get your photos out of Aperture in a way that you can then import them into Photo RAW. Just export them out into a folder structure, kind of like the folder structures we've talked about, and you'll be able to use your photos out of Aperture as well. It'll work in Apple Photos, and soon, coming in Q1, it'll actually work in Corel Paint Shop Pro as well. So lots of different places you can use it coming up.
So cool.
Yeah. All right, so here's a question about the Macbeth color checker. We've had a few people ask if you can create custom camera profiles. I can tell you that's something it doesn't support today, but it is something that we're considering for the future. And if you actually go to the product page, you can go to the Photo RAW project. We'll talk about this later this afternoon, but it's a great place for you to put in your suggestions and your things that you want for the future. And we measure how many people vote for those features, and if it's something people like, it's something we'll consider for the future. So if you want color checker support, go there and add that comment and vote it up. All right, let's see. So we have some other questions in here. Liz, here's a question about the Olympus EM1 Mark II. Is that a supported camera?
You betcha.
Yeah, and if you missed our question earlier, just about any camera is supported. We support almost 1,000 different cameras going back to 20 years ago. Anything built in about the last 10 years from major manufacturers will be supported through our Tier 1 engine. So it'll go through the GPU, it'll be super fast, you'll get all the tone and color out of it. If you have an older camera that's more than a decade old, or is more of an esoteric camera where there weren't that many of them made, that'll go to our fallback Tier 2 engine, the one that we have used in the past. That one won't be quite as fast. You'll still get all the data to work on. It just won't be as fast to get the information out of it. If you've got one of those brand new cameras that's just hit the market, we work really hard to add those as quickly as we can. Those are always free updates. Every month we'll issue a new camera update to add more cameras to it. We just have to get our hands on it to be able to create great support for them.
If you guys missed this earlier, by the way, there are over 1,000 cameras that are supported by ON1 Photo RAW, and people like me who have been using the same camera for a very long time are shocked that there are this many cameras. I have no idea what camera that was, but it sounds awesome.
There's a
and
lot
we
of
support
cameras.
it, so that's what matters.
All right, here's another question about different cloud services. So out of the box, we'll automatically discover your Dropbox, your Google Drive, and your Microsoft OneDrive folder. But any cloud syncing service that actually keeps a copy of it on your computer is supported. All you have to do is create an indexed favorite of that location. So if you use Amazon has one, I forget what they call it, you can just tell it to keep an eye on that folder and it'll automatically keep track of it. So not too hard.
Very cool.
Let's see, what other questions do we have in here? Liz, why don't you remind people how to submit their questions?
Don't forget that you can submit them on Twitter, using hashtag AskOn1. Woohoo! We also have a chat module, so you can ask questions there. We really like to hear what you guys are interested in, and as Dan had mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about the RAW project and how your input is important to us. So just make sure that you guys are submitting those to us so that we can hear a little bit more about what you need.
Yeah. All right, so here's a great question. It's how do I get the pictures from my camera into Photo RAW? So Hudson, is that one you want to take?
Well, I'll tell you, there are multiple ways. The simplest way is to just put a folder on your desktop, move the cards off your camera's card, move the files off your camera's card into that folder, and light it up and browse. That's all you really need to do. There's no cataloging, there's no building of previews. As we just talked about in the Lightroom session just a little bit ago, it flies at building previews and letting you run through and color your images. So I'm an advocate of that, even if you're going to be working in a program, a database program like Lightroom, just because it's so much faster to go through and color your images. There's no special process needed.
Yeah.
You create a folder, put those photos in there, navigate to it.
Yeah. We purposely didn't even create a fancy, camera download dialog. All you do is you plug your card in, it'll show up in Browse as a drive.
Sure.
You click on the photos, you drag them wherever you want them to go. It doesn't have to be any harder than that. You don't have to have that ginormous dialogue that you see in a lot of apps where when you plug your card in, it takes over your computer and you have to go through a 12-step wizard just to get your pictures on your computer. You just plug it in, click and drag.
You can also
like micromanagement.
You can also automatically rename everything in Browse, which is really handy.
Yes.
If you've got sort of a template that you like to use.
It's very important. Templates for naming your files is very important. I feel like I sound like a school teacher, but you guys, you gotta label your photos.
Yeah.
I was actually on a friend's computer the other day, and all of her images were named the original file name. And I was like, how do you find anything? Like, at all? And you can do all of this in Browse. And I have to say, my favorite part about importing, because there is no import dialog, I just click and drag off of the card, and then I open Browse, and I sit and I wait. And you can just watch them all line up in the folder, and so it's really fun, because as they come through, I'm like, oh, I love that picture. So I'm not very patient at all, and so I'm like, I want this to happen, and you can just watch, as you're importing your photos on your desktop, you can open up Browse, and you can just watch them come through the folder, and I really like doing that.
One more little tip for people too, if you're gonna do that pre-cull in Browse, go through, get rid of all the photos that you don't like if you're working for a client, filter it, get rid of all those ones you want to delete, and then rename it. It'll look like you didn't have any culls.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really nice, especially when you number all of your files and the clients are like, why did you jump from 62 to 182? And
Something
I'm like,
went wrong
because you were crying and I was trying to get those out of the way so that you look nice and pretty. So I was trying to be nice there. So it's a good way. I think dislike, that dislike button, that sounds mean. I use that a lot. But it's a great way to cut down from 4,000 images to 500.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, okay, this is manageable now. So
This is slightly off topic. One thing that I've learned to do when I shoot a lot of pictures is rather than go through and throw out the ones I don't like, I just go through and I 5-star the ones that I do like. And usually I've got enough there, I just throw everything else away. I know it's crazy. It sounds like a heretical way of doing it, but I'm only looking for 10 or 12 of my favorites. Once I'm done with that, I don't care about the rest
you're
of it.
just so positive. That's what it is. I'm the negative personality because apparently I'm a hateful person and I dislike everything. And then here's Dan and he's
Look for
just
your
like,
favorites.
everything is beautiful and sunshine.
I have this
Everything else
That's the
philosophical
difference between
aversion
us.
to using the 5 stars.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, well, because I need some headroom. You know,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
hoping that as I continue to improve as a photographer, I only use 3 at this point, because I'm hoping I'm going to need to differenchiate to 4, and then I have the dream of someday having.
You're
Someday
so
having a
positive
5.
too. This
Wow.
is great. I feel like a
Well, that's a
horrible
lot of
person.
growth.
Like, just hate them all. 1 star.
1.
With photography, it's all about perspective.
I'm thinking long haul here.
All right, here's
all
another
about
great
your
question. Is there a feature in RAW that lets you create a virtual copy like you can in Lightroom? That's actually a feature that will be coming. In the next live session, we'll actually talk about what the future of Photo RAW is. And I can tell you that virtual copies, or versions, what we'll call them, will be available as a free update later this year.
And you guys, there's a lot of new features coming. I know we have a whole session next time, but we're very excited about what's coming. I'm like vibrating a little bit.
Next
We're really
session-
excited about what's coming up next.
Next session's
you
going to
guys.
be really fun.
Yeah,
Talking
so
about all things
if-
that are coming up and the ON1 Plus community.
Oh, and the ON1 Plus community, which Hudson is going to talk a lot about that. And I'm new to the ON1 Plus community, so it's going to be a really fun thing to get to know for me. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about what's coming, please make sure that you come back this afternoon.
4 o'clock Pacific.
There's a few questions about Icc Color Profiles and color management. Of course, Photo RAW is completely color managed. It'll pick up whatever the tag profile is in your camera, or if you have other files on your computer that come in, it'll pick up the tag or embedded profile from that and honor it. Internally, it works everything in a 32-bit ProPhoto space. So you've got this huge, giant, unbounded space that all the work is actually done in. And then when we preview it through your profile that you selected, and then, of course, your display profile on top of that. Then when you go to export it, you can pick what you want to convert it to on the fly. You can import your own profiles for that. Same thing when you print. When you print, you can pick what profile you need. So if you're outputting to your printer and you've built a custom profile, you can make sure to pick the correct profile to get the right color coming back out.
Nice.
Let's
All
see,
right,
what are
Dan,
the good questions we have
What
here?
else you got for us? We're just firing away. Okay, so can I answer one of the questions?
Jump in there, please.
One of the questions that I feel like I've done a lot of webinars. I've actually done a lot of like live training sessions for ON1 before, and one of the questions that I feel like we constantly get asked is what really is one of the differences between Lightroom and ON1. And we always talk about effects. That's something that's constantly used. But I really want to make sure that I take the time to point out one of my favorite, I feel horrible saying this, it's my favorite module inside of ON1. It's resize. Resize, we don't always talk about it, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because people don't print as much, but one of the big things, and big is a very operative word there. One of the big things inside of ON1 that you just can't do in other programs is using our algorithm inside of resize to get your photos to a large yet still highly detailed look. And you just can't do that in Lightroom. There are lots of other things that we have touched on that you can't do in Lightroom, but resize, you guys, is incredible. It's a program that I have been using. Actually, it was the first program that I used with ON1 before I even started working here. And when I got to start working for ON1 and they asked me to do some tutorials for them, I was like, oh my God, you guys, it's the resize company. This is awesome. So resize is something that as you guys are getting into printing and as you guys are getting really excited about moving forward and practicing your new workflow with ON1 and Lightroom, resize is something that we don't always talk about, but that is a huge difference between those two programs.
Yeah. Resize came from a plugin in Photoshop that was the very first plugin I ever used. It
Yep.
used to be called Genuine Fractals.
Me too.
And I've long been a huge printing aficionado, and I use resize so often. And I'll tell you one other thing that it's great for is when you want to go back to those old files, maybe something you shot long ago on a Nikon D70 that was only 6
Yeah.
megapixels, but you want it 24 by 36, go see what resize can do for you. It can often double or even more. It can
Oh,
even
yeah.
better than double the
Triple.
resolution of your image and still look
Quadruple.
great at viewing distance.
Yeah.
There's nothing better for
Quadruple easy.
upresing.
Yeah,
Very
if you're a film photographer too, that was how I got started with Genuine Fractals, now Resize.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to find photo labs to print film, especially large format film. So Dan had mentioned his 4x5, I shoot 4x5 too. And when I was in college and even now, I can't resize, I can't just show up at a photo lab and do that. And so if you guys are film photographers out there, which heck yeah, go film, Resize is gonna be a game changer for you too,
Huge.
because a lot of people are gonna have to edit and process their film photos on their computers, and now you can make them absolutely enormous. I mean, I think I hit 8 feet for one of my photos for my thesis project in college, and that was using Resize years ago.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible program. So I want to make sure I point that out.
Definitely. And if you haven't used resize in a while, I think of it as the print module is the way
Oh,
I
yeah.
think about it. I can take any photo that I've worked on, I can bring it in there, I can crop it to the size that I want, because 9 times out of 10 the proportions don't match the paper print size that I want to
Yeah.
make.
Right.
So I can crop it, I can sharpen it right there, and then if I'm printing on canvas, I can add the gallery wrap wings to it. If I'm printing a mosaic, I can print it out in tiles.
Tiling.
Yeah,
Oh,
tiling
tiling.
is huge. It's a really nice feature.
Well, you know,
And you can
The-
call up the print dialog from right inside of it. So
Yeah.
you don't actually have to make a copy of your photo. It's all just done in memory.
Yeah.
So I can bring up the print dialog, send it off to the printer, and then rather than hitting done, I just hit cancel.
Yep.
I didn't clog up my computer with another big file.
I
Well,
love
was
that.
one of the cool things about Resize is that I used it for the first time recently, and I did a whole tutorial on YouTube where I went from Resize to the printer and then showed the print after it came back to me.
Right.
And the cool part about it was I used the gallery wrap function on a very large gallery wrapped canvas image, and it's not just the fact that you can add the wings to it, but you can do various things with those wings. Do you want them to stretch? Do you want them to reverse? Do you want them to have a colored border on the sides? So there's a lot of cool options that are in there that I didn't even know existed. So when I got in there for the first time, I was like, oh, this is cool. When I called you guys up, I was like, hey, can I do a tutorial on this and send it to here and do this? I was wicked excited about it. You know, probably more excited than any one person should be about the program.
Oh
But hey,
no! You should
no,
see me
you're
when
right.
I get
Never mind.
stoked about resize. It's really weird. I'm like,
I
yeah.
have clients who like really big prints in multiple sections, mosaiced across the
Yeah.
wall, and resize is
Definitely.
my
It's the
go-to.
perfect tool for that.
Slice it up.
All right, you guys. Well, that is the end of session 2, and thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute blast for all of us. But don't forget, we're going to be back for session 3, and we're going to be talking about what's next, not just inside of ON1 Photo RAW. We're also going to be talking about what's next in the ON1 Plus community. So make sure that you guys come back to us at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and in the meantime, you're going to be able to watch Matt Kliskowski's Photo RAW Master Course along with some of Hudson's on-location videos that actually give you a little bit of an idea of what's going on with the ON1 Plus community. So hopefully we will see you guys back, and don't forget to submit those questions in the meantime on Twitter, #AskON1.